So thank you everyone for joining us for the last panel of the afternoon. We are going to have a really good conversation about navigating the ESG landscape, and we're going to look at synergies and connections between climate action and education reform. I'm Christine Özden. I'm the Global Director for Climate Education at the Cambridge Partnership for Education, which is part of Cambridge University Press and Assessment. And I've got a great group of guests with me for this discussion. Let me do some introductions. We've got Begoña Águeda, who is the Corporate Citizenship and Environment Lead for the Middle East at Accenture. We've got David Boucher, who is the Senior Corporate Partner at the Global Business Coalition and at Reed Smith. We've got Ayla, who's the Senior Vice President for Sustainability at DP World. And we've got David Ramos, who is the Head of Sustainability for the Middle East, North Africa and Turkey region at HSBC. So let's get straight into our conversation. ESG. David, this one's coming for you.
Okay.
What is it? Why and how should businesses engage?
Okay. So ESG, as we probably all know, but just for clarity, stands for environmental, social governance. And basically, it should now represent standards by which we can measure the impact that any business has on the environment, on society, and also, I think importantly, the accountability and transparency of that. And that very much relates to the governance piece, which I think often gets omitted. And look, I think the way businesses can demonstrate how they react to climate change, their sustainability approach to the environment, and I think in particular their stakeholder approach to governance can really demonstrate the role, the social role that a business has in society. What it is not is what it is not, in my opinion, because some companies do this, is relabeling their corporate social and responsibility arm as ESG. It's good for business because the whole nature of ESG is it should involve all stakeholders of a business. So it's good for the customers, it's good for consumers, it's good for suppliers. Ultimately, of course, it's good for shareholders, and it's good to develop the brand. And ultimately, in terms of the business, the most successful companies that are demonstrating meeting their objectives on ESG in line with their businesses are those which are enshrining ESG values into the corporate and commercial objectives and aims of the business itself. And I can go into some detail about that later on. So it should be a win-win for business. We know ESG has had some bad publicity, particularly in North America. And again, we can talk about that, I'm sure.
Great. Thanks, David. So that's moving us into our topics. Global organisations looking to have impact at a local level. Can we get into some specifics? And I'm wondering if I can ask Ayla and David maybe to give us some examples or an example from your organisation where, as global organisations, you're really looking for impact with your ESG work at a local level. Ayla, maybe you kick us off.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have something called the Our World, Our Future sustainability strategy that serves as our North Star for for the implementation of anything we call like sustainable business practices. And so I'd also like to build off sort of a note on ESG because there are so many buzzwords sort of floating around. And so at least at DP World, we took a step back and said, okay, what do these buzzwords mean for us? And so we have a sustainability strategy called Our World, Our Future. It's how we operate as a responsible business with 3 legacy areas: education, women, and water. How we measure our sustainability strategy is applying an ESG lens. So we have an ESG scorecard that has a list of metrics, a list of KPIs that help to measure the success of our sustainability strategy. So ESG was something that percolated from financial institutes in the financial industry. So we're an end-to-end logistics solution provider. We're a very large global business operating in 64 plus countries, very heavily involved in emerging markets. And so the implementation of the sustainability strategy is complex. And so we very much take a global local approach. So we have a global sustainability strategy, and then we address the local level needs based on region and country level. And so, for example, coral restoration may be an effective solution for certain ports, and for our inland operations that are looking at transportation, then other areas like safety become a really core component of how we do business in that vertical. So it's really applying ESG from a measurement and risk perspective, and our strategy is based on internal and external stakeholder engagement. So what do our customers require from us? What do our investors look from us? What do our communities ask for us? And then based on that, we've prioritized those topics.
Right. Thanks, Ayla.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously, very much like Ayla's and the World, we do have a global sustainability strategy as well. It doesn't have a fancy name like yours. We just call it Global Sustainability Strategy. But at the core of what we do as a financial institution, obviously, we do lending, and we want to help our clients transition to a low-carbon economy. That's obviously the biggest impact we can have as an organization, and also would allow us to meet our own targets, which is net zero by 2050 across the whole finance portfolio of our activities, operations by 2030. But because of the focus of the summit, I would really like to showcase one example around education. What are we doing on educational programs? So education has been always at the core of our philanthropy, the global philanthropy strategy, which is linked to our global sustainability strategy, obviously. We've been supporting educational programs for many, many years. I've been 8 years with the bank, and education has been always at the core of what we do. But one example that talks about that global relationship and how we bring it to a local level is the fact that we have an agreement or a collaboration with Junior Achievement Worldwide since actually the year 1942. So we've been supporting this organization, and the programs that we do with them, they focus on developing education skills, but mostly around economic skills, around employability, around capacity building for the students to understand the financial system and how they can leverage on it and apply it much better. So the program is under one of the umbrella pillars of our strategy that's called Future Skills. And the program itself, the global program, is called Building a Financially Capable Generation. So we have developed, obviously this is implemented locally, so we have developed partnership with a lot of stakeholders. We have an app that is available for anybody to download and access that the team has developed that is called ThinkQuest. And that helps increase that kind of knowledge and financial capability. On the local level, then we establish relationships with local organizations, and they are very deep-rooted relationships because we don't only support them with specific programs, but we also we belong to the board. So, for instance, we are part of the board members of the Injust UAE and other ones, and Injust Al Arab, which is the umbrella platform for the region. So we make sure that we not only provide funding to those programs, but we also help drive the organization forward by being actively involved in the direction of travel, so to say.
Great. Thank you. And I'm going to zoom us out now. We've been local, we're going to go back global. And maybe, I'm not sure, is this a provocative question? ESG, investment into ESG funds has been a bit of a mixed bag of late. We hear that ESG is becoming increasingly politicized. Lots of discussion about greenwashing. Is it? Isn't it? Is ESG really here to stay? And
I
who
think
wants
it
to-
is.
Thanks,
I think
Ayla.
it is. It's just about how you interpret it. So going back to my first point, it really is interpretation. I think it's also important to remember that there's E, which is environment, but S, which is very much like the rewirEd summit. So looking at how, when we're looking at our decarbonization strategies and our climate strategies, that we're also looking at reskilling, education. And so what I meant to bring up in my first response is also a very key education project we're working on. So thank you for reminding me. It's the end of the day, and you forget what the thematic focus areas of the conferences you're speaking at. And so we're actually launching a very important platform. It's the DP World Education Platform that looks at building the capacity of teachers through a digital platform. So you visit this digital platform. There's a plethora of resources that are provided from a green skills perspective, oceans, etc. Like, so anything related to the environment, but really making sure that everyone's engaged in this ESG process and that no one's left behind in it. So I absolutely think it's very relevant. I think there are key projects that support and propel ESG, but ESG is really important with the lens of impact measurement as well.
Yeah, I think it's all about labeling at the end of the day, and I think a lot of companies were already doing a lot of this stuff, but it's now been brought within the ambit of what we are calling ESG. And I think in terms of the criticism, I think a number of disparate groups, ESG, it's easy really to criticize ESG because ESG encompasses so many things. And so people can blame ESG for what they see as poor performance in a company, for whatever reason, if it relates to something not which is perceived to be immediately within that company's core business. Because I think part of the issue is that so many aspects of ESG, and particularly education in many ways, are seen not to be relevant to businesses now because of the long-term nature of education and the benefits of education. But I also forgot to mention something, and while there was reference to an app and other examples from DP World, the Global Business Coalition for Education has actually produced a playbook for business on ESG and education, and it's really, it refers to a lot of real-life examples of different businesses who are also putting education at the core of their ESG policies. And I think significantly some of the areas that haven't worked so well and what companies have done about it. So I would encourage anybody who is really interested in having education at the heart of their ESG policy to download that playbook, which you can do from our website.
Thank you, David.
Can I add something in there?
Yeah.
So, were you going to speak?
I was just
then you first.
thinking something of I cannot take credit for this, but yesterday at a panel, somebody mentioned how having a sustainability strategy is outdated, that now we can only talk about sustainable business strategies. So that, and I thought that it was really, really interesting because it really goes to show that in the same way that we all operate in a digital manner, there's no way, I mean, there are very few kind of enterprises or companies that can operate now without any digital support. We really believe, I thought that it was a really good thought that, I mean, any company that is not sustainable will be completely out of the market in a couple of years. So I think it's more, so I think it's a very interesting shift, no? To pass from kind of having one strategy to make things sustainable to having your business strategy sustainable from scratch.
Great point.
Yeah, I was just going to, I was reflecting on that question, and at the end, ESG is a tool to measure things that companies were already doing. Companies were already addressing environmental impacts in their operations, their supply chains for many years. They were addressing social impacts. They had governance structures in place. So I think it's just a way of putting it together under one umbrella, and then it becomes a sort of a buzzword. The moment that happens, people find things that are not working with that. There is always things like any tool. There is always an opportunity to improve it over time. So I think it's here to stay. Maybe gets rebranded. Maybe the name. We were talking about SDGs a few years ago. We were talking about sustainable development a few years ago. Things just evolve, but the narrative underlying, I think, is the same, in my opinion.
I think COVID was a bit of a watershed for all this as well, because, you know, I think that made a number of people and businesses in particular realise that they can't opt out of the natural world, whether it relates to health or whether it relates to climate change or the environment. In addition to what COVID represented, of course, people had the time to take a step back. We had some natural disasters during that period, and I don't see us ever going back to a mindset before that time now.
It's a great point in the sort of the speaker room just before we came in. People were talking about bouncing back, and I think it really is about bouncing forward, something different. But let me grab hold and let's find some synergies in terms of corporate initiatives into education. And Ayla, you talked about skills and reskilling, and conscious that 2030 is a big milestone for many reasons, and the people that will be in employment in 2030, most of them are in employment now, so those people are there. Just as COP kicked off, there was a report that was released by the Prince's Trust in the UK, which, after focus group with over 2,000 young people in the UK, basically came to the conclusion that young people are least interested in the jobs that are most needed, and that also 3/4 of young people aged between 16 and 24 do not know what a green career path is or what green skills are. So with that context, and Begoña, I'm going to pick you up on something you said to me earlier. You said corporates should take a more active role in shaping education. Why? And how?
I think we should, because I mean, if we think of, I don't think that anybody has got the solution to this big problem that we have now for the whole planet, but it is obvious that it's something that was created by a collective group, and now as a collective group we need to face it. And I think that companies have got both kind of an obligation to reduce their negative impact, obviously on environmental level or some other impact, but also they have an obligation to increase their positive impact potential. Again, because we are using the resources that are supposed to be free until now. We are obviously receiving the benefits of the education system. In the end, we are having talent. So there is a moral, ethical, I don't really know what's the best word to describe it, to give back to society by investing in the community. And I think thinking of the specific case of Accenture, where we are, the only thing that we have is people and knowledge, we don't have any other assets. The way to give back to society is by, at the moment we are working on a taxonomy of skills. We know now which skills are going to be or are becoming already obsolete. Things that there's no really point in focusing on them because they're not going to be relevant for anything. But we know which kind of skills our clients are demanding. So the way we can help is by sharing that information with those that are shaping the curriculum so that they can incorporate those new skills into the new education systems. Obviously, we are not educators. We don't know how to do that curriculum, but we can share that information saying this is what the market is demanding now, and this is what the market is no longer requiring.
Thanks, Begoña. Thank you.
And to build on that, it also just makes business sense, right? Like,
Exactly.
yeah, we're good corporate citizens, we're giving back because that's the right thing to do, but it also just makes business sense on so many levels, especially if you're investing in a community or investing in a city or a country in the long haul, right? So you have to now get involved in the full cycle of education. So I think traditionally it was like internships, industry exposure, that was like the primary pillar of a lot of education strategies. But now it's also, depending on where you operate, like access to education, especially if you're working in emerging markets, but then also the future skills. And so what we're calling future skills today, so it's interesting what you're saying about that study. You're calling it green skills, and no one knows what green skills is because in the future it's not going to be green skills, it's just going to be skills. And so that transfer, so education needs to provide skills that are transferable versus like categorizations. And so again, at DP World, we're hoping through the hub, through internships, we just look at all three pillars of an education strategy and not taking silo.
Sorry.
David.
Thanks. So I was thinking as well from an internal perspective. Obviously, HSBC is I think we have 230,000 employees around the world. So it's quite a big organization, it's like a small country. So also the role of educating our colleagues internally is massive. I've seen the transformation that the company has gone from sustainability being always a priority, but let's be honest, it was operating more on the side because it was a corporate social responsibility department doing activities that were not core to the bank's activity, to where we are now, where sustainability and sustainable finance is one of the 4 strategic priorities of the bank globally. So we had, as a sustainability team, we had to upskill ourselves in how does a bank work and what a bank should do. I didn't have any financial background when I joined the bank. I joined because I was a sustainability expert. And then the bankers, they need to upskill themselves on sustainability because they need to have those conversations with our clients on a daily basis. There's no one day that I work around the building in different departments that I don't hear sustainability here, sustainability there. Everybody is talking about it, so everybody had to upskill themselves to be able to have those conversations.
I mean, it hits on the key role of business, I think, when it comes to sustainability and the environment. And, you know, as I've said to many people, I'm involved in trying to raise money for education in developing countries. But when you talk to businesses, the last thing you should say is write me a check. You need to say, how can you engage? And the key of all of this that we've been talking about is the engagement of businesses in the community, in the wider community. And I think it redefines really what we mean by the role of business and how they can impact education. And it will vary from communities to countries to regions. But I think the key to all of this is that businesses are able to engage and make a difference. I hadn't heard the survey that you'd mentioned, but I've also seen a number of other surveys where people want to work for companies that are truly sustainable, that are going to make a difference. And, you know, they are able to make a difference not only through their own activities, but also saying, we're not going to deal with suppliers and other third parties unless they're sustainable as well. To actually put them on the spot and say, what are your ESG credentials? What are your policies? And what have you done about it?
And absolutely, and I can provide a proof point on that. So we didn't have regular communication with our talent and acquisition team, and now the vice president of talent and acquisition has approached us and said, please provide us a monthly update on what is happening with group level sustainability, because we are being asked in the interviews. They're asking us. So in order to be an employer of choice, especially for the younger generation or people who are early in their careers, it's super critical. And then the second point, so education, the investment in education is a social license to operate, right, in the countries in which you're operating. But what I will say, going back to that investor piece, investors are not asking us about education. They're not asking us about the S. They're only asking us about GHG emissions. And so if anyone here is from the financial industry, which I know they are, we would, as sustainability professionals, appreciate conversations going in that direction, because actually the way reporting is looking like is double materiality. I don't want to get into technicalities, but going into, okay, what is the financial impact of the issues that we're prioritizing? And in fact, and my colleague is sitting in the crowd, and she leads the education work we do at DP World. She was concerned, and she came to me and she's like, does that mean we're going to invest less in education? Yeah. Because education might not be prioritized within our double materiality exercise versus just stakeholder driven materiality. Yeah. So we're, as sustainability professionals, a little concerned about the S.
Yeah, and it's a great point, Ayla, and I think, I mean, it's quite, as an education professional, we're all education professionals, it's welcome that this is the first time that education is officially programmed into the COP agenda. It's quite surprising at the same time. So I think we should take away that call for that finance focus on education for sure. I'm going to pick up on something you said earlier. Well, it actually came out from a number of discussions here. I want to take us to those synergies with corporate initiatives, corporate strategies, and education. And at the risk of being siloed, and that was the word you used, Ayla, you talked about silos, I'm going to pull us to formal education. You've talked a lot about the work in communities, which might be regarded as more informal. In terms of the work that your organisations may be doing in the formal education system currently, just for information, is anyone engaged in anything that is currently in the formal education system, be that K-12, be that higher education? Any examples that we can share?
We do that in the form of complementing what the formal curriculum is already offering to students. And the way we do that is by investing in creating training assets that we think are going to provide those future skills. It can be either it was coding five years back. Now it's no longer coding because coding is now part of the curriculum in most schools. It's now focused on these green skills, even though green skills, I'm learning myself that is a really, really wide element. Is design thinking, for example. Design thinking, I personally think that it will be part of the curriculum very soon. It's something, a technique very, very simple to understand. So basically we are creating those assets that we offer to our partners so that they can facilitate those assets to the, and I think that we are seeing that some of the kind of educational entities in the country are really perceiving the value of those, and we expect that, because obviously we are not the only company doing that, that will eventually be part of the curriculum. So again, it's a way of introducing some of the skills that we are using now for our work that we believe that can be really easy to show to students at that level.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Debbie, did you want to add anything to that, or?
Not now.
Okay, great.
For once.
I mean, I can add to that if we have time, but we take a very similar approach where we add to the formal education process.
Yeah. Well, I want to move us on to there's the current or formal education. I want to move us on to education reform specifically. As the Partnership for Education at Cambridge University Press and Assessment, we do a lot of work with national agencies, governments, ministries of education, helping them analyse, design and deliver their education systems and improvement. And just too many times we find that policy makers are surprised that the outcomes they wanted are not the ones that manifest themselves. And there are many reasons for that. And it might be a bit simplistic to summarise it this way, but often those reforms haven't taken into account the complexity of the situation and the context. And as businesses, as global organisations, you are there in every context. So my question is, how could the private sector benefit education reform? And this is, you said, being put on the spot. I really want to put you on the spot. Really, how can corporates benefit education reform? Anybody want to?
Honestly, I think using these taxonomies that we are using now to select, in the same way that we are selecting people based on their skills for our work, this is obviously driven by the demand in the market, and I think that this kind of knowledge understanding could be used by those in charge of the audiovisual policies, as well. Some of the soft skills. I know that soft is not the best word, but I mean those skills that are, because in the end technical skills can be learned to a certain extent. But we are seeing that because everything is changing so quickly, there are kind of a cluster of skills that are going to allow you to move to different jobs, which are the essential things that anyone should be learning at the moment, for either for a young person or for a person that is no longer that young, that needs to be upskilled. So really, I mean, the soft skills that we are identifying as permanent, as really needed for any job, from my point of view, and obviously I'm not an educator, should be the part of that educational reform, so that anyone leaving the education system has got those soft skills and can be ready for taking up any other technical skill.
I mean, we find that the work we do at the Global Business Coalition for Education, a lot of it is in lower to middle income countries. So again, we're working with companies who are interacting directly with local government, because children are coming out of school in those countries without the skills that they need. Mm-hmm. So they're directly talking to the ministries of education about the curriculum. I think the other thing to talk about when it comes to developing countries is the culture, and you mentioned the context of this. And we've still got some terrible situations where kids aren't going to school because they're being kept at home to do work and other things, and other countries where girls aren't allowed to go to school. And I think business has a really important role to work with the local community and governments on those issues as to why that needs to change and how it's in everybody's interest for that to change. And as I say, business, I think, is key there, and part of what the ESG policies of companies in those relevant countries have is very relevant for that purpose.
I think we identified an employability gap in the Middle East. That's the region I cover. Like, there was a report from ILO that said that the MENA region, youth from 18 to 25, they had a 31% unemployment rate, and that was back in 2016, but it has gone up over time. So what we try to do with our sustainability strategy, apart from the initiatives I mentioned earlier within JAS, we've been supported several projects that I think are quite innovative. One of them is called the Tower, and that is trying to cover the gap of those employability skills, those soft skills that you were saying before, helping students to come up with, probably develop ideas that can address a specific issue. So we had on that program 15,000 students, of which 3,000 then they created actual ideas that they were addressing a local issue in the problem in the countries where they're operating. And some of them, they actually turned them into companies. I met one of the students randomly in the COP just a couple of days ago, and she said, "Oh, we are now deploying our solution in Egypt, in the North Sea." So that's in the Red Sea. So that's an example of how companies can leverage. Other two initiatives.
I'm going to.
No.
We're running short on time, David. Do you mind if I?
Just one, if I can. I'll only say one then. You mentioned before attracting investors into soft skill or education skills. We did a research last year with Dalberg, trying to see how feasible it would be to launch a skill-based fund, meaning raising capital to address the gap of green skills in the region. So the research, of course, showed that there is a gap. There is a gap, particularly in 4 sectors: agriculture, energy, construction, and transport. And that, the green skills, the transition that needs to happen in the UAE, would actually create a loss of almost 2 million jobs, but there is an opportunity to create another 2.5 million jobs from the green skills. So what we're doing this year, we're providing catalytic funding to create that structure and hopefully help raise up to $60 million they wanted to raise to help the skilling institutions across the region to actually deploy green skills.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Yeah, I've only just realised that this is a countdown to when we've got to finish.
Yes.
You know, anyway,
basic
understanding. Anyway, now I see it. Okay, so I'm going to finish with the last question, really, which is, and you mentioned the toolkit earlier, David, from the Global Business Coalition, and there I think there is the business case that, or the proposition that corporates and investors should invest in education at all stages as significant stakeholders. And if we sign up to that business case, so to speak, what would that or should that mean for the future of ESG initiatives? And we've got 2 minutes. I'll finish, David, I think let's hear from you, and that will probably take us to the end.
Okay, I think ESG, and we may even change its label for all sorts of reasons we talked about, it's only going to grow and develop. It's all about the impact in society as a whole. And I think as far as education is concerned, I think people need to be educated on education, because it's now more than just skills training. Like, it's early years. There's a lot of focus on early years at the moment. It's really important. Primary education, tertiary education, re-education, retraining. There was reference at other panel sessions about adult training and education. That needs to be part of ESG as well. It's not just about children being at school. Children being at school is a priority for sure. I think it's about collaboration. That's been referred to earlier. It's working with others. It's breaking down barriers between traditionalists. And one thing we've not mentioned, which I think is really important because it runs through ESG, is diversity, equity, and inclusion in its widest sense, which I think needs to be built into this. Believe it or not, there are still some companies who think they either focus on ESG or diversity, equity, and inclusion, and somehow the two are separate. We've got to educate people more about that. And on education itself, we've got to make people understand that all these other issues, whether it be health, climate change, which we've talked about, keeping peace in the world, if we address education, we will not have the degree of issues that we have in all of these areas, because education runs through all of them. And those of us that are passionate about it need to do a much better job at educating everybody else. And that also means an important role for business, because those that get it need to communicate that more within the local communities in which they operate.
That was perfect timing.
Perfect timing.
All right.
So we are out of time. Panel, thank you very much for your time and your engagement and your experience and your insights on this. And thank you very much for being with us.